I'm just a local liberal nerd, but not enough people read for fun anymore. Like 44% of American adults don't read a single book in a year, kind of not enough. Most of the mainstream media discussion surrounding books either relates to their film and television counterparts or the book talk community. There it is. That's my one mention of book talk for the video. I mentioned it, I acknowledged it, I paid it respect, and we're gonna set it aside now. The average American adult can't read above a 6th grade reading level. I've taught 6th graders, and they read baseline textbook passages about continental drift and Pangea. Gen Alpha is so cooked, they don't even know how to make memes about Chekhov's gun and personification. And yes, this is an assignment I had to teach once when I was a sub. My 2024 New Year's resolution to read more was inspired by a conversation I had with one of my best friends at the end of 2023. He told me how he sat down and got through an entire novel in a week, and how proud he was of himself. Considering the statistics I just listed, I agreed. He should be proud of that. But then it made me realize how brain-rotted humanity has become that we are proud of each other for reading books for fun. At the time of this conversation with my friend, I'd slowly reignited my love for reading through my girlfriend recommending a bunch of her favorite books to me so she could have another person to talk them through with. I'd also just started working at an awesome independent bookstore, Mysterious Galaxy. Not sponsored, just a cool place I used to work at with a lot of cool people and a lot of cool books. And one of my job responsibilities there used to be writing up reviews for whatever I was reading to either put on my staff shelf or around the store for perusing customers. It's a win-win-win-win-win. I get to write more reviews for work, I get to have more awesome conversations with my girlfriend, I discover some new favorite books, and hey, being a better reader makes me a better writer. Hence, my New Year's resolution was born. Read more. How much more? Well, I never thought far enough to get a specific number. Just more. Also, my first lesson from this process is be specific. While my main goal was to read more novels, I counted anything with book in the name. Specifically, because comic books are valid literature, and you will not be able to tell me otherwise. I kept a log of everything I read last year on these 2 Chainsaw Man sticky notes, which leads to my next bit of advice. Keep a solid ledger. Spreadsheet preferable. What else did I learn throughout the year? What worked and what didn't if you're trying to get out of a reading slump? What did I think of what I read? All this being said, how did I do? Oh God. This is all the physical media I read this year. With all the comics I read this year fitting in this short box, give or take a few things that I lent to friends and friends lent to me. However, we're in the year 2024 where you can an audiobook to the moon and back. And trust me, I don't think any of us have nor want the time to count all of this out. So yeah, let's get to the sticky notes. I read 80 titles across books, comics, audiobooks, plays, e-fiction, all that jazz. I read 23 novels this year, 10 physical, 10 audiobooks, and 3 mixes of going back and forth between physical and audiobook. I did not realize that I read 55 different comic book titles this year, and that's not counting each full, graphic novel, like one of these as its own separate thing. I'm counting it as like a full book. So for example, if I read more than one volume in the same, you know where I'm going. For example, I read all of Charles Soule's Star Wars run. That is 50 issues of Star Wars, about 10 of these worth, and I'm counting that all as one title. Okay, so I read a little bit under 2 books a month. Technically, I read about 1 book a month and listened to 1 book a month. So yeah, audiobooks kind of bailed me out a little bit in regards to achieving my resolution. Again, I wasn't specific with how much I wanted to read during the year, so I'm calling this a success. Realistically, I read about 2 to 3 books a month for the first half of the year, and then from September to December, I only read 1 book. Adel Grace's Wisteria. And for a spoiler alert for later in the video, this was one of my top 5 novels of the year. The reason it took so long to read that isn't because this took me 4 months to read, is because I got it in August, at the time, due to outside circumstances, lost all my motivation for reading, and then picked it up in December, and I burned through it in a week. So why was that the case? Why did I lose that motivation partway through the year? Well, let's turn the clock all the way back to January 2024. The next piece of advice I can give you if you're trying to get out of a reading slump is start small, start simple, start fun. Short stories, novellas, anything under 300 pages, really. If only I listened to my own advice. Mysterious Galaxy does these sci-fi fantasy book crates every month, and they need a couple of booksellers to review the book, put those reviews in the box, so then that way, customers know they're not just getting some random book off the shelf. They're getting a book that thought was put into. The book for the January crate was I hate being short. Gaurav Mohanty's Sons of Darkness, a Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings-like tale inspired by Indian mythology. I love the first 5 seasons of Game of Thrones, so I thought, why not? I get a free book out of the deal. This leads to my next lesson. Use your resources. If you work somewhere that synergizes with your resolution, take advantage of those benefits and staff discounts. Working at a bookstore, for example, allowed me easy access to books in exchange for reviewing them. Outside of work, there are also several resources like library, personal resources like borrowing from friends and family. There's a bunch that I'm probably missing. You get the point. Getting back to Sons of Darkness, it was the opposite of small and simple. It clocks in at a whopping 645 pages. By far the longest thing I read this year. It was also the book that stretched my brain the most. It throws a kitchen sink of world building, names, factions, locations at you, and trusts the reader to be smart enough to comprehend all of it. It's the only thing this year I had to actively reread passages 2 to 3 times to make sure I comprehended everything being said in that particular paragraph. I had a great time with it, and I plan on reading the sequel when that comes out, but it was just a lot. Since the store hadn't gotten any physical copies yet, I started my reading with a virtual ARC, or advanced reading copy, on my computer. Up until this point in my life, I've been a die-hard physical reader, only diving into audiobooks at the end of 2023, early 2024, via a 1 audiobook a month subscription service, Libro, which is basically like Audible, except instead of the money going to Amazon, it goes to independent local bookstores. I've been using Libro to read through the ACOTAR series at my girlfriend's request. And since I used it as bait in the thumbnail, here's my ranking of the ACOTAR series as I read it. No, I will not elaborate further. I listened to Court of Silver Flames on my commute to work while straining my eyes to read Sons of Darkness on my computer. Probably one of the reasons why I needed these glasses. I was starting to stall on Sons of Darkness, and my deadline to get the book reviewed was fast approaching. Then it hit me. I had access to the audiobook for Sons of Darkness. So once I finished listening to A Court of Silver Flames, marking my first completed book of the year, I pivoted to double dutying Sons of Darkness by reading the virtual ARC on my lunch breaks and listening to the audiobook on my commute to work. This whole page-long paragraph experience with Sons of Darkness leads to a few more pieces of advice. Experiment with what works best for you. If I stayed steadfast in my physical reading ways, I would have read drastically less this year. Bouncing between physical and audio worked for me, and reading on my computer didn't. But I wouldn't have known that if I didn't try. Next, you need to make the time. Wild concept, I know. You can't read a book unless you take the time to read it or listen. Analyze your day and carve out a block of time. In my case, I turned my commute into 40 minutes of reading every day. And that adds up quickly, which leads to routine is key. Weaving reading into my day-to-day schedule made it infinitely easier to get up the energy to read outside of that because it was a normal part of my day. Finally, be a part of a community. I joined my local chapter of the Horror Writers Association and went to a handful of writing workshops and coffee houses. Having people to keep you to your goals, share your accomplishments, and network makes the small steps feel big. I took my newfound lessons and applied them to the next books I read in 2024. My commute audiobook was this unofficial The Boys nonfiction about psychology and superpowers I had free access to. Physically, I read Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke and Other Misfortunes by Eric LaRocca, his first of many collections of horror novellas and short stories. I love horror, but realized outside of Goosebumps, I never really touched horror literature before, which felt wrong. I'm a sucker for a great cover and a story framed through emails and text messages. I also know I read faster when I'm in the last 100 pages of something. So when all of the stories in this book are under 100 pages, I zoomed through this in a couple of days, reinvigorated. I reviewed the book for Mysterious Galaxy, leading to a couple of my coworkers informing me that I could read their next 2 short story collections, one of which wasn't even out until April of 2024, through a virtual ARC site that we had access to as reviewing booksellers. They didn't have to tell me twice. I didn't want to deal with having to strain my eyes computer reading again, so I wisely invested my holiday gift cards in a Kindle. I zoomed through them both in my audiobook by the end of the month with reviews ready. Mysterious Galaxy even ended up getting a physical ARC of This Skin Was Once Mine, the short story collection that didn't release until April, and I showed up for work one day with it already on my shelf. The love was felt that morning. I kept this routine of 1 to 2 physical books plus 1 audiobook a month, along with my weekly comics for February, March, and April. Then May came along. At the end of the month, StokerCon was coming to San Diego. What is StokerCon? The convention for all things horror literature. This convention also hosts the horror reading equivalent of the Oscars, the Stoker Awards. So all of the huge names in horror were going to be there. As a semi-broke award-winning playwright and aspiring novelist, I recognized the massive learning opportunity. But the cost of con tickets made my wallet sad. Lucky for me, I had not one, but 2 ways to work at the con and get that experience without paying for a ticket. Mysterious Galaxy is such a well-regarded indie bookstore that they're usually asked to sell books at local events and conventions such as this one. And you can't hand sell books without booksellers, so I took the initiative and put my name in to work at StokerCon. I also signed up to volunteer at the registration booth through the Horror Writers Association. That way, I'd get to experience the con from multiple angles. Sure, I wouldn't have the freedom to explore if I bought a ticket, but I'm not paying to be there. I'm being paid to be there in the case of Mysterious Galaxy, and I'd be able to pop into panels briefly on my breaks. Now, what does StokerCon have to do with how much I read this year? I'm getting to. When I was filling out my volunteer form for the Horror Writers Association, it asked if I had any panel ideas and what experience with that panel topic was. Oblivious to the implications of what I was filling out, I wrote a couple paragraphs about how fun a horror for the stage panel would be. And I jotted down my experience with playwriting and horror. After I submitted the volunteer form, the Horror Writers Association gave me my volunteer hours and asked if I wanted to be a panelist for a horror for the stage panel titled Stage Fright. I accepted. I'd never been a panelist before, so it'd be a great experience. I assumed it'd be a nice, low-stakes thing, speaking alongside fellow aspiring writers from my community. Then I got the group email with all of the panelists, and one of them was Eric LaRocca. The same Eric LaRocca whose books I'd been loving and reviewing for the past few months. I looked at the rest of the stellar panel and moderator list, and my heart stopped for a second, because one of these things is not like the other. But after a moment of heavy imposter syndrome, I got to researching and reading. I attempted, and mostly succeeded, at audiobooking at least one of each of the other panelists' novels or essays that I hadn't already gotten to. I read and watched the horror plays referenced in the panel blurb, so I'd be ready. The panel came and went, and I felt great. I didn't make a fool out of myself. I met some amazing authors and got to talk about writing with them. I was even able to get all my books signed and personalized by them in the signing area. June and July went by with similar progress with a couple of short stories thrown in. I slowed down toward the end of August for one working at Comic-Con sized reason. It's kind of hard to find the energy to read when I'm giving it my all processing book purchases for most of the day and spending whatever breaks I have exploring my first ever San Diego Comic-Con and hunting down con exclusives for me, my girlfriend, and my friends. One more bit of advice: give yourself grace. Life throws you curveballs. You are a human, not a robot. Taking a break is not crashing out. As a recovering workaholic myself, this is the hardest one for me to follow. Then we got to August, and I fell off of reading almost entirely. I stopped working at Mysterious Galaxy, not for anything bad. I wasn't fired or quit in an angry rage. I'd always planned on working there for about a year while juggling what I wanted to do after college. That year had come up, and I decided to shift jobs while focusing on trying to get my teaching credential. Doing that, however, shook up the routine I'd spent the last 8 months building. I no longer had a consistent commute, so I didn't have audiobook time built into my day anymore. I also didn't put in the effort to move that reading time to any other part of my day, doubly so for physical reading. Shadow of the Erdtree and the Silent Hill 2 remake were looking especially tasty, so that ate up the rest of my reading time. Frankly, I'd lost my motivation. Between August and the end of the year, as I mentioned, I only read one phenomenal novel, that being Wisteria. But that doesn't mean I stopped reading cold turkey between August and devouring this in December. I've gone to the comic book store basically every Wednesday since I was 12. And you know what they say, breaks in routine only strengthen addictions. Around this time, I also decided what I wanted my next long-term writing project to be. A superhero novel, which as of recording, I'm about halfway done with. And if you care about that, I've been putting all my progress journals up on my TikTok channel. I'll probably eventually migrate them to here as well with everything going on. As I got into working on that, I read more comics for research, dove into stuff outside of my usual pull list, and gave myself the excuse to read classics that I'd always wanted to, but never really had that full concrete reason to read. And that's my reading for 2024. As for my top 5 novels of the year, please read these so I have more people to talk to about them. Number 5 is Star Wars Darth Plagueis by James Luceno. I have heard the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, and it is to the Phantom Menace what the Clone Wars is to Revenge of the Sith. Number 4 is Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. Do not read this on a plane unless you want a panic attack. I'm technically cheating with my number 3 since it didn't officially release until January 2025, but I read the arc for Eric LaRocca's At Dark I Become Loathsome. It made me feel icky in the best possible way and was definitely my favorite of all their work that I read this year. Number 2, I already gave this one away, but Wisteria by Adeline Grace. Why are you not already reading the Belladonna series? And for number 1, we have Nestlings by Nat Cassidy. This book is further evidence as to why horror is the most beautiful genre in fiction, in my opinion. I also wanted to add Edenville as an honorable mention because The Shattered Man will eternally live on in my mind and my arm. And these were my top 5 comics of the year. I originally planned on doing a 1-sentence review for everything I read this year, but that was before I lost all my audio in my first recording of this, and also just realizing the eternity that would take to edit. If you care about the rest of my 1-sentence reviews, since I already had them all written up, I linked a spreadsheet with all of them on it below, as well as the link to my Goodreads that has longer versions of some of the reviews for stuff that I read this year. The biggest thing I took with me this year, outside of all of the moments of inspiration I got from the stuff that I read, was that a lot of the lessons I learned about getting out of a reading slump can be applied to most long-term goals. For example, my 2025 New Year's resolution is to finish the first draft of a novel. I started writing small in high school, making a bunch of 10-minute one-act plays that eventually led to The Story of Jimmy Kaplingus, my award-winning play about existential crabs. As for the superhero novel I'm working on, I'm getting through it at about 500 to 1,000 words a day on weekdays. And I chose superheroes because it makes me happy. I write with friends once every couple weeks, and we update each other on our progress. And if I don't meet a goal one day because life gets ahead of me, that's fine. As long as I sit down and get something down on the keyboard. Painting, coding, home improvement, gaming, a new language, acting, online content creation. You can do most of these things if you work with these lessons in mind and build them into your life. It's not overnight gratification, no skill or hobby is, but the feeling of true accomplishment is immeasurable. But yeah, hopefully this helped you with your New Year's resolution. Since I know this video won't be out until February, I imagine most of you have already given up on your New Year's resolutions at this point. But don't wait until the next time we rotate around the sun to learn something new. You can pick up anything you want at any time within reason. The worst that can happen is wasted effort. And you know what? At least it means you had the effort to waste. Thanks for watching. As for a quick update on the channel, I know I planned on getting this out by the end of 2024, but I was a bit overzealous for that on my TikTok and in the last video. I forgot how busy the holidays are, and the first time I recorded all of this through, I plugged my mic into the wrong cable on the camera, and yeah, there was no audio, so I couldn't use any of that footage, so I had to redo all of it from scratch. My goal is to put out 1 video every month in 2025 just to get some smaller creative scale projects out there while I work on the novel. Due to the delay, just consider this the January video. Ideally, I should be able to get another video out this month as well. The script is currently looking to be a bit shorter. I've got a nice head start on it already, and it'll be a lot easier for me to work and record. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you later this month. Have a great day.